Greetings, Craddock here. Today we have a treat of a build, still in the lead, the best Nephilim Rifting build for Wizard in my opinion, especially when you tack on more paragons, though surprisingly you don't need them to get going with this build, so we're going to talk about that in a minute. Granted, with the teleport animation being reduced and the combination of the follower revamp benefiting other builds just slightly more than this build in Nephilim Rifting, there are a lot of challengers this season to the previous champ, and while I still think this build is on top as the quickest overall average clear for Wizard, there are a lot of builds like Typhons, Firebirds that are going to challenge its superiority. That being said, let's get into it because it is a very smooth build. Vyr Chantodo is also very efficient because you are able to pick up items while attacking, another one of those builds similar to the Typhon's Frost Hydra build I just featured, so very good. Alright, this season with the follower revamp, we get to fit in the Hills because we don't need Nemesis Bracer, and we have an additional ring slot to play around with because we don't need the Avarice Band anymore. We put that on our follower. So we put the Hills. This is going to be a 30% multiplier, 30% elite damage, which is going to be really good for this build because you're mainly having trouble killing the elites. It's not so much an issue with killing the trash. So this is going to be a huge benefit, especially earlier on in season. I was thinking it might need higher Paragon to work effectively, but it works really well even at these lower Paragon levels. Granted, it is not a season starter because there's so much cooldown reduction that you're going to need to place for the build to function. However, it is a pretty easy one to transition into after you get the right affixes, right? That's the only thing, is it needs a little bit of attack speed and a lot of cooldown, right? So let's go over that now. You're going to want cooldown on the source, gloves, both rings, and the shoulder piece, and the diamond in the helmet. We have evocation, paragon, we have the Gogoku swiftness, going to give us 15% there, and the enchantress is giving us prophetic harmony, 10% cooldown, which is really nice for this build because it allows us now to swap out one of our affixes that we were previously allocating to cooldown reduction. Previously, you would either put cooldown reduction on the weapon or on the amulet in place of crit. Well, no longer do you need to do that. Or sorry, in place of cold percentage, I used to prefer the crit anyway because you're only putting out... Crit is very good for this build, just a side mention, because you're only putting out one wave of destruction every second, so I would always prefer the crit over the elemental damage anyway, but that's beside the point. We're going to need a lot of attack speed in this setup because the weakness of the build is not mobility, it's not damage, it's really ramp up at the beginning of the rift, especially when you have 0 stacks. Your Vyr 4 piece is going to give you attack speed, but early on in the rift you won't have the stack count necessary, and especially if you get a rift that is lower in density, your stack count will also suffer. So this is why we place attack speed on the gear to kind of counteract and also help out our ramp up of this mechanic, help us hit those high 5 attacks per second points to where we can then use so early on in the rift, gameplay wise, the first cycle especially, you're going to want to use the Archon Punch, which is the number 1 attack once you go into Archon on enemies, to be able to... This has the best dynamic ramp up for attack speed. Once you enter Archon, your beam attack rate is snapshotted based on the number of stacks that you had at the time, plus the 50 from Fazula. So this means earlier in the rift, when you have a lower stack count and you enter Archon, it's going to be better to use that punch that first cycle. But after that, you can use the beam, because the beam will have adjusted up in snapshotted attack speed, and you will be able to stack slightly faster using this method. It's still fun to punch elites in the Rift Guardian, so if you want to do that to focus more on the melee aspect, And sometimes I find it easier to do that just to pick up items, especially. So for the lower Paragon configuration, we are including the Aether Walker. And there are a couple of reasons why we're doing this. You actually need the extra power from the Aug to be able to clear efficiently at lower Paragons, which means even though we have the extra cooldown to work with from the Enchantress, we can't put it to such a use to reduce our or increase our cooldown reduction all the way to 75%. Reminder that 75% is exactly what we would need to be able to swap out the weapon here, because the Archon Teleport is a base 2 seconds cooldown. The GCD on Teleport is half a second, so therefore you would need 75% cooldown to run without the Aether Walker. What the Aether Walker is giving you here is those quicker teleports. It's reducing this down to the GCD, even though we don't have enough cooldown reduction to permit that. Now, you wouldn't want such a high cooldown reduction with this build anyway, because at lower Paragons you want to be spending a little bit more time outside of Archon to stack up your Chantodos a little bit more. Typically at higher Paragons you can get by with just 10 stacks of Chantodos. At these lower Paragons you need at least 15, was kind of what I was seeing, closer to 15 to be able to crush the Rift, right? So this is why we're slightly lower cooldown reduction with this particular setup. This is also why it's built the way it is. Now, notably, there is a very interesting setup that unfortunately I wasn't able to test before the patch or the season is going to go live, but I can show it to you. At higher Paragons, we actually make a very interesting swap here. We're going to swap out the Aether Walker, and we're going to swap in the Echoing Fury, and this is because we're able to reach a cooldown reduction of over 75% by dropping the Aug and picking up the Leoric's Crown and the Cube. This is going to do two things. It's going to allow us to reduce our teleport down to that half a second GCD without even having the Aether Walker, so we're able to fit in Echoing Fury. Echoing Fury is really good for this build because in the Cube, at least, it's going to ramp up your attack speed even quicker, allow you to ramp up your stack count all the more faster, which is really the one weakness of the build, is that first Archon cycle. So whereas the lower Paragon configuration, we're going to gear a lot of attack speed. You're going to place attack speed on weapon, rings, or not both rings, just the one ring, the Enchantress, and with the Focus Mind and Paragon, and from the stretch time. Stretch time attack speed here will affect you 10% from the Archon bubble and 10% from the ground bubble if you cast it outside of Archon. So your first rotation, typically what I will do is cast this on the ground on top of me when I go into Archon. That way it's kind of snapshotted into the stacks and the beam stack rate, at least for that first rotation. That's kind of nice because on occasion when you're on the move you still need to use your beam, right? So you don't have to do this every rotation. It's really just the first couple of rotations, or if you're in a rift with low density, using that double bubble stacking method can be of help. Mainly though, this is just placed on the bar. Even just getting that 10% once you're in Archon is just really helpful. But transitioning into the higher Paragon setup, we can see that we don't need quite as much attack speed on our gear and stuff, so because of the Echoing Fury, it's just going to help out so much. So we're going to swap out that skill, the slow time. We're going to swap it out for Explosive Blast, which, while it's more Arcane Power intensive, will also give us quicker Chantodo stacking, and overall this will be a great method. Something to note with both variations is that the Calamity also gives you stacks for Chantodo when you're outside of Archon. So typically what I'll do is I will cast Calamity on enemies while channeling my Static Discharge. That way I'm keeping them CC'd, surviving, while at the same time stacking up my Chantodos. Especially the first rotation, this is very useful because you don't have any toughness from the Vyr 4-piece and 6-piece, right? We have A very important point here with Archon is you want to choose the slow time rune. You need the cold rune to match up with your element on gear. Very important, because if you don't do this, you won't benefit from the elemental damage that you have on gear. The Bane of the Trapped, similar to a lot of other builds that use cold, the Wave of Destruction will, even if it's farther than 15 yards, you will still get the Bane of the Trap bonus, because your Wave of Destruction as cold will chill enemies before the damage instance. So this is really nice for benefiting from this bonus even at those slightly farther away ranges. Resource is going to be covered by APOC mostly, because we have such a high proc coefficient spell here with the static discharge. The bolts also can proc APOC, so this is why it's so efficient. You're definitely going to want that roll on your source. And then for the low paragon setup, we're actually going to gear with resource cost reduction on the shoulder piece, going to also help us out. Quick mention here, we also have the Power of the Storm coming into effect. We have the cost reduction after resource cost reduction, which is going to be quite nice, reducing Arcane Power cost of all skills by 3. Another little tip is that most players don't do this, but I definitely do for this build, is put in maximum arcane power into your paragon. It definitely helps out having that larger pool, especially also with having the source and the wand rolled with max AP will help you out just managing your arcane power when you're outside of Archon, especially with the Aetherwalker variation. You can start to spend a little bit too much arcane power if there are no enemies nearby. You need to stop casting your static discharge. You spend at these higher attack speeds so much resource so quickly, and if you're not hitting enemies, you're getting 0 value because you're not proccing your Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, and you're not getting returns on your arcane power. Your arcane power pool would deplete very quickly. So if you're in a low density situation, just stop casting your static discharge and teleport using the Aetherwalker bonus until you can get there. Typically, it only takes 3, maybe 4 teleports at most before you can find an enemy and then reset your Archon again. Yes, so really nice benefits here for the High Paragon variation as well. Because you can wear the Swami, you can actually get an additional affix for APOC. This allows you to drop the resource roll on the shoulder piece in favor of toughness. Crit chance is also very important to get on gear in regards to managing your resource as well. So this is, in addition to damage, I would prefer crit over crit hit damage, simply because you will get more returns from Arcane Power and crit, be able to manage your resource a little bit easier with having those crit rolls as opposed to having a crit hit damage roll. So if you have to have a ring that has int instead of crit hit damage here, that is perfectly fine at lower paragons especially. So something to note here is that lower paragons on the wand, you don't need that cooldown affix, so you just go damage percent, int, and attack speed, so very easy peasy. But at the higher paragons, you're definitely going to want that damage percent, cooldown, and attack speed. One other thing with the higher paragon setup, you get extra movement speed in this build as well. You can fit in the Werzekian Arm Guards. You're destroying a lot of objects with the AoE of the Wave of Destruction, so this will be of large benefit, I think, for just moving in between places. Of course, we also have in the build already the Boon of the Hoarder, and the Illusionist going to beat out Audacity in my opinion, even though the Wave of Destruction is very close on attack. Even at lower paragons, I really feel that Illusionist is the stronger passive here, allowing you to pick up items quicker, allowing you to click doors and such, all the much easier. And one thing to note here with this build is, just like the Typhon's Veil build, we have an attack that is emanating from our character, which we are not having to take time to control. It's just automatically happening. So this is great because it's very efficient means for you to be able to pick up items while you're still killing enemies. The benefit here really with being able to traverse these lower density levels, even if you don't have as high of a stack count on your Vyr, it is a strong enough build to just traverse the rift, and it will reduce those maximum clear times down, in my opinion. So while it's not the fastest clearing build for Wizard in density, it is still a very fast one in density, and it excels. It gets better with density. And it will, it's not so slow on like the Moors levels, levels with doors. It has no problem opening doors. There are a lot of benefits here with the Vyr Chantodo. It's very fast, it's very efficient, very fun to play as well. Looking forward to playing this one in season, and I hope you enjoy it as well.